Do you think that you can have it all? That's the question we're going to talk about today, between being an entrepreneur and a mom and trying to juggle it all. My name is Charisse Walker, your host of Unbreakable Mompreneurs, and Joe Stone is in the room today. So, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. I'm Jo Stone, and if you couldn't guess from the accent, I'm Australian. So I live in Sydney with my two girls who are almost 15, the almost is very important, and 11. And I also run my own business, helping women how to have it all without burning out or stepping back.
On paper, like on the outward appearance, you had it all for about 20 years.
Mhm.
Right? And so, do you want to touch on the background of that before we get going into kind of where you're at now?
Yeah, sure. So on the surface had it all. I was in corporate for 20 years and had reached my corporate goal was to have a chief in my title. I wanted to be in a listed company, and because I'm in Australia, I wanted either a global or an Asia Pacific role. And so I got there by 32. I had two kids. I was a chief marketing officer in a US listed company. I had an Asia Pacific role. I had staff in 5 countries. I was traveling. I had a seat on a not-for-profit board, which was another thing I wanted to tick off early. I had built my own house, which is very much the Australian dream. I had two new cars in the driveway. And on the surface, I thought I've got everything I ever wanted. I have a husband. I was doing triathlons at the time, so I was fit. And so why am I so unhappy? Why am I miserable? Why am I always guilty? Why am I exhausted? I've meant to arrive.
Mhm.
It's meant to feel better than this. And yet there was this real sense of emptiness and unfulfillment despite trying really, really hard for a really, really long time. So I went on a journey of blowing up my life. First up, I sold the house because I was stuck in this position with a big house and a big mortgage, and therefore I couldn't leave my job. So my passion was to start my own business, but I wasn't in a financial position to do that. So we sold the house, moved further out of town. Then I left my job, started my own business. It was only when I found myself in the hospital, having checked myself in, thinking I had a incurable autoimmune disease, that my body was screaming at me saying, it's still not it. Something is wrong with this picture. And it was then that I had to go on a journey to discover what my all was. I was very much living somebody else's life, or the life I thought I should be leading, that I could have sworn was my own, and yet it wasn't. So then a sort of 5 to 6 year journey of identifying what really made me happy, what actually made me fulfillment, how to unlock emotions and all these sides of me that were very, very buried. And out of that, my business was born. Wasn't intended to start this way. I meant to be a consultant. And then now I find myself as a life coach with the Balance Institute, because it turns out there are many other women like me who also struggle with balance, who've also felt burnt out and exhausted for a really long time and want to create success on their own terms. So yeah, now hundreds of women through my signature programs, clients across 15 countries, a team of five, and yeah, growing exponentially year on year.
Congratulations. That is so good.
Mm.
And I appreciate you being vulnerable, because I think that that's the part that a lot of people don't see. And I like
Mm.
how you talk about surface, because the book I wrote was Flipping the Iceberg, and we always talk about getting below the surface. Because
Mm.
on the outside, everyone thinks you had that perfect life, and why would you get rid of it? And now that you look back, how was your relationship with your children, with your husband during this time that you were going through surface level, phenomenal life?
Yeah, well, I thought it was good. That
Mhm.
was the challenge. But the thing that I always struggled with was being present,
Mhm.
because my brain was so busy and I couldn't switch off, and I was doing a million and one things, that I still remember the night. I think my eldest was maybe about 5 or 6 when she was learning to read. And I was reading her a story before bed, but I had to get back online because Hong Kong was waiting for me to sign something off. And I skipped pages in her bedtime story because I wanted to hurry it up. And she turned to me and she said, no, 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 you skipped a page, because she was starting to read. And I got grumpy at her because she worked out that I skipped a page because I wanted to get back to my laptop. And that was a real wake up call to go, hang on a second, what actually matters here?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, I've always had a good relationship with my girls, but definitely in the last sort of 5 to 6 years since I went on, started this journey, I've become a lot more truly present. So I was there
Mhm.
physically, but I often wasn't there mentally. And the same with my husband. I spoke a lot about work. We were both just so busy that there was very little time for each other. There was very little time for a relationship apart from being in parental survival mode of, you pick this one up, I'll pick this one up. So it was very much logistics. But now we've developed this relationship where my husband had to come on the journey with me in order to for us to stay together, really. I joke that we just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary, but I think we've been married about 3 times
Yeah.
because we've sort of burnt down the relationship that we had and
Mhm.
had to start again because I keep changing. I ask of him to change, to not change who he is, but to do the work on himself. Because as I've done more and more work on myself, I don't want him operating from his wounds. I don't want him being triggered by things. And so it's been this really beautiful journey of both of us really becoming our best selves, getting rid of the conditioning, dealing with our past family stuff so that we don't project that onto our kids. And it's really important to me that we break that cycle of, things that are passed down from generation to generation that aren't often good things.
Joe, I really appreciate your vulnerability because I think every listener has gone through that. And
Mm.
I just got back from a conference where they talk about that. There was a husband and wife, and basically the same thing. They sold everything that they just, she goes, I can't do this anymore. And the interesting thing was that they were on stage 2 years ago getting ready to do this whole TV show about who they are and come in and look at we're this perfect family and stuff. And that same time, she actually had gone to him and said, I can't live this life anymore. They sold
Mm.
their home, they moved across country, and she sold her businesses. Like they gave up everything. And another
Mm.
one did the same thing. They sold everything so that he could pursue what he felt like he needed to do, much like what you did. And I think
Mm.
that that's the part is like when was the turning point you reading that book to your daughter? Was that kind of when it
It
clicked?
was one of the catalysts, but also finding myself in hospital
Oh,
was one where because my body, I'm blessed with a body that I can push quite well, as in I can function off 4 to 5 hours of sleep. And I was taking that for granted. I was pushing my body and pushing it. My kids are 3 years apart, and between them, I did triathlons. So I was training in 3 disciplines, plus I was working and I was traveling. And so I pushed it, and eventually, I my body just was like, okay, enough. I tried to give you signals. They talk about first of all, you're thrown a pebble, and then you're thrown a rock, and eventually you get a boulder in the face that floors you. And that was the piece that I went, okay, what's wrong? How did I not see this coming? Or what have I been doing to my body? Because for me, I don't really do anything with my hands. And part of my autoimmune condition was going to be affecting my brain. I had lesions in my brain in the area around communication. And that's my superpower. That's my strength. So suddenly the thought of, oh my God, what if I have to have surgery on my brain and it's in the area that is my livelihood, my skill set, my greatest joy? What on earth? What am I doing here? And then I went on a journey of self-healing. And, I was proud to say I went back to my neurologist 2 years later and he said, what did you do? I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, all the lesions in your brain have disappeared. That doesn't
what?
normally happen. And I
That
was like,
doesn't.
well, I decided to heal myself.
Oh,
So, yeah, I shrunk a 9 millimeter lesion that was in my brain that was very detectable and they were very worried about. And it's gone.
how did you do that?
After I came out of hospital, I dove into a lot of, I guess you would say, things like the psychology of the subconscious mind and how we go about healing ourselves. Because when you understand more about your thoughts and you realize that your thoughts perhaps have been making you sick,
Mhm.
well, then your thoughts can make you well. And so, really delving into, subconscious mind conditioning, releasing things, recognizing that a lot of disease comes from stored emotions that's why it's called dis-ease, because on the inside, we aren't as healthy. I jokingly call it emotional constipation. I
Mhm.
had huge amounts of guilt and shame and anger and rage trapped in my body that I wouldn't allow myself to feel. And it was only by releasing a lot of those, learning more about the process of defrosting, of actually connecting and getting out of my head. I was and still am a very intellectual person. I like things to be rational. I like them to be logical. And the thought of feeling and intuition and so many of these parts of myself, I'd really shut down because the corporate world beats it out of you. You don't have time for a gut feeling on something. You have got to produce a paper with the risk benefits and produce a traffic light system. And so a whole side of me had become completely dormant and dominated by the other. So that's one of the reasons I called my business the Balance Institute, because it's not just about work-life balance. It's about head, heart. It's about masculine and feminine energy. It's about gut and logic. It's about all the sides of us. And only when I unlocked all of those sides did I really find peace and calm and confidence on the inside, because they're the things that most women tell me they want, and yet they're not in their head. So you have to defrost if you want those things. I was swimming in resentment and guilt and shame, but I didn't know how to really access joy. I didn't know how to find peace and contentment because my mind wouldn't switch off. So that was a big part of my journey.
Where did that drive come from, for you to feel like you had to overachieve, you had to do everything, you had to be the super mom, the super woman, the super business person? Where do you think that came from? And did you have to address anything from your past in order to move forward, or did you just move forward?
Oh no, I had to do a lot of healing work. So, like most women, and now I guess as a coach, I see these patterns in so many women that come to me. I was very much one of those born high achievers that was then molded by my parents. It wasn't intentional, and a lot of my parents' cues were very subtle, but very much my family. The biggest insult in my family was to be called lazy. That was the biggest insult you could throw at anyone. And if I was ever sitting down, it was, oh, get up, go on, do something useful. What are you doing? And praised for marks, for bringing home medals for or ribbons. And my grandmother, who was very influential in my life, was also always putting my cousin and I, who were 3 months together, back to back, like who's taller? And so a lot of that bred, she'd say, oh, I heard you had a maths test. How did you go? And how did Amy go? And so suddenly there was this, oh, okay, well, I've got to beat Amy. I've got to, how do I make sure that I'm better than her? And it was all subconscious. Nobody said this is what we're doing, but it was what I made it mean. It was how I got significance in my family. It was how I got attention, and I equated that attention with love. So my parents never said, we won't love you if you don't get above 90 on a test. That was never explicit. But, I remember bringing home a test out of 100 and I got something like 92. And my dad's first question was, what happened to the 8? And I went, oh. So it was those little tiny, tiny pieces. My parents were very supportive. And again, on the outside, it looked like an ideal childhood. They've just celebrated 50 years of being married. So, they're still around. They still live 20 minutes from me. But yeah, it was these little subtle shifts. So I had to go back and heal a lot of that, whether it was my family of origin story, the conditioning about what I thought it was to be a mother, to be the perfect wife, to almost parent like I don't work and work like I'm not a parent. So there was all this conditioning from my childhood. And it was only when I addressed that I was actually able to move forward. I had to heal it. I had to let it go, all skills that I didn't know how to do. Only then could I move forward. I'm a very forward focused person. I don't look back a lot. I don't really spend a lot of time with regret, but these were literally seeping wounds that were driving so much compensatory behavior. And that was the lens that I had to look at it through. I was like, why do I have to go back and do this? It's the past. But when I understood all the compensatory mechanisms that were as a result of that, the inability to rest, thinking I had to earn my rest, not being able to stop because my self-worth was very much tied to how much I could get done. It was tied to output. They were my dominant ways of being. So I had to go back, unravel them, understand how did I get here so that I could then work out what is my true nature. If I peel away the conditioning, who really am I? and what matters to me, not what matters to my parents or to society or to grandma or to anything like that. So it was definitely a journey that way.
Thank you for, again, being vulnerable, because that's something where when I wrote my book, that I wholeheartedly believe that sometimes the way we behave as adults is rooted in stuff. And your parents seem like wonderful people. They had no malice, they had no ill
No.
intent. And it's just the way that we internalize things as people. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, my biggest fear now that I've had all my kids that, and several have grown up. It's like, okay, I totally screwed them up. And I mean, you know? And so it's very interesting how our childhood affects us as adults. And so
Mm.
in your business, is that what you do? What type of coaching do you do? Is it business stuff? Is it personal? Is it both?
It's both. So it's very holistic. So it's more about how do you redefine what your all is? Because
Mhm.
most women come to me feeling burnt out. I have a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs who are doing all the things whose self-worth is very much tied to their output, to how much they can get done. And when you're an entrepreneur, it never stops. When you're a mum, it never stops. And so if you still have to earn your rest, if you still don't know how to disconnect and switch off, then you will never ever stop. And burnout, particularly for those high achiever types, almost becomes inevitable.
Yeah.
And whether it's what I find, particularly with entrepreneurs, is it's people often think that burnout means I've landed in the hospital or my body's collapsed and I can't move. A lot of women come to me with what I call high functioning burnout. That's where they still go because kids still need to be fed and they've still got stuff to do. But there's this complete absence of joy and this almost cloud of exhaustion that follows them, that someone says, "How are you?" and they turn into a puddle because they are so choked up with emotions because they've completely neglected their own needs and are very much at the bottom of the list. So that's what I now do is help those women redefine what their all is. What does success mean to them? How do they let go of the past and then construct a life made up of business, parenting, self-care, relationships that actually is one that fulfills them? So how do they structure their time? How do they better manage their mind? How do they manage their emotions? How do they access their intuition? And particularly for entrepreneurs, that usually results in a lot more time freedom than they have, but it also results in a lot faster decision making because they stop second guessing themselves and overthinking everything and tap into their intuition and more confidence in moving forward with whatever they do, whether that's restructuring their business because they realize they've been available to everyone all the time, whether it's putting in better boundaries, which is something that we have to be taught between work and home so that you've got time for yourself and what really matters.
That's wonderful. So, in the workplace, what type of changes do you think need to happen in order to support more people like you, high achieving women?
Well, there's changes that need to be made in the workplace, but there's also changes that we can make ourselves. And I think both have to happen. I think from a workplace perspective, ensuring that caregiving isn't stigmatized. I very much felt like, particularly when I came back from my parental leaves, I had to double down on proving that I hadn't lost my edge now that I'd become a mum, which was a lot of my belief, but also perpetuated by the workplace. So I think the more we can have workplaces that acknowledge that we're human, I think also a lot can be done to support men to step up. My husband's been sort of part-time and he's been at home and he's been attempting to re-enter the workforce at the moment and watching the stigma attached to men who've had career breaks to care for children has blown my mind. It is much, much worse than the stigma that women suffer because everyone knows that, well, the women have to have the babies, so they've got to take some time off.
Mhm.
And yet men who do that, because if we want more women to step up and run their own businesses and grow and have that ambition fueled, well, if there are caring responsibilities, whether they're parents or children, usually someone needs to help with that. Someone needs to be parent one on the daycare call list when they're sick. And too often by default, it's women. But if we can get more men to take on those roles, then we can strive and be our best selves. So there's definitely structural changes in the workplace, but there's
Mhm.
also things we can do ourselves.
That's great. And for the women that aren't ready to leave and become an entrepreneur, how do you suggest that they break through that glass ceiling that I've experienced? I'm sure you've experienced. What is your suggestion?
For me, I found that because I was the only income earner at the time when I was in corporate, so I had to get my business going on the side while I was still working. I was consulting at the time on a daily rate contract. So I sort of took a step out tentatively. I took a 6-month consulting gig so that I essentially bought myself 6 months to grow my business. But I think a lot of people, a lot of my clients want to leave and they see it as a black and white. Well, I either work for someone else or I work for myself. But business is a real, you have to fail a lot. You have to try things and you have to move fast. I don't mean rushed, but I mean you don't sit on your business idea for 2 years and wait for the perfect time to leave. The more you can do things messy and the more you can do things and fail fast and do that on the side while you have an income, if that's something that you need to do financially, will get messy. Get in there if it might mean sacrificing the odd weekend day. But if that's the path that you want to go down, if you have a passion or you have a purpose, that don't let perfection be the enemy of good, which is what I see too many women get trapped in.
That is a good piece of advice. And so let me ask you one more. If you were sitting on a park bench and you were looking at the self that started on the journey of entrepreneur to where you are today, what is one piece of advice you would give your person just breaking out of the corporate world?
I think to be prepared to fail, and that the faster you can fail and pivot and know that you don't know all the steps. I was in corporate. I had project plans. I wanted to know, okay, well, how am I going to get there? Entrepreneurial, it's a journey because you don't know all the steps. So there, for me, becomes a release of fear of what if it doesn't work out and what if I don't know all the steps, and really a lean into faith that I'm meant to be here. The next step will only reveal itself once I take my step. So when you accept that you're not going to know it all, you're not going to know how it lands, because this is not where I plan to end up by any stretch of the imagination, but you just got to take the step.
Yeah, I agree. And one last question for you is, well, second to last. I want you to think, because your oldest is 15 now, your child. And so you're sitting on a park bench and this 9-month pregnant woman comes up and first-time mom sits next to you and you start talking. What is one piece of unsolicited advice you'd give her of any stage of being a mother?
That's a good one because there's a lot of trite advice out there. My husband and I often joke that this wasn't in the manual, as in there are so many parts of parenting that no one ever tells you about. It wasn't in the brochure when they say, be a parent, you get cuddles, you get this and that. You're there at 4 a.m. with a screaming child going, no one told me about this. So prepare for the unexpected, that you cannot control what's about to happen. And the more you lean into your intuition in terms of going with the flow and trusting your instincts, whether you believe you have them or not, definitely was advice that I got later on that I wish I'd had earlier.
Thank you. And the last question is, if one of our listeners wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Yeah, well, they could. I've got a podcast as well if they want to learn more about what we talk about. It's called Balance and Beyond, and they can find that on Spotify and iTunes and all the podcast places. Or they can also visit my website, which is balanceinstitute.com, where they can find out more about who we are, what we do, and there's lots of free resources and trainings on there if they want to come and learn some tools and tips.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jo, for being on.
Thank you for having me.
And Unbreakable Mompreneurs, I hope that you've taken some golden nuggets today, specifically thinking about your journey and your self, your younger self really does impact the person that you are, but you can heal from it and you can move forward. And if you're feeling a little burned out, acknowledge that and do something about it, because we don't want you to have that boulder either that so many end up having and facing. Go out and make it a great day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.